Hello YouTube and welcome back to the garage. Well, I'm afraid we're not going to be working on the project bike again in this video, but I've actually got a little job that I need to do on this bike here. Now this is my everyday run around, and I have to say it's been a fantastic little bike, totally reliable, but the other day it got a bit hot and bothered and the cooling fan on the radiator wasn't kicking in. So I'm going to have a look at that today, and we're going to see if we can diagnose what the problem is. Now, this is actually a fairly common problem on the CB-1, and that's really, a lot of it is down to the rather convoluted way in which the wiring is done for the fan. So before I start pulling anything apart, let's get onto the bench, we'll open up the manual and we'll have a look at the wiring diagram for the fan, get a bit of an understanding of how things work. Okay, so here is our wiring diagram for the CB-1. Now, if you've watched my videos on wiring, obviously we're not interested in the vast majority of this, so what I've done is I've looked at the diagram and I've actually drawn out the important parts for this particular circuit. So here is my rather comically bad drawing, but hopefully it should demonstrate how the circuit works. So you have the power comes in, the positive power comes in from the battery through the ignition switch, and it goes to one of the 4 fuses. Now the fan motor actually has its own dedicated fuse, and the fuses on the diagram are labelled A, B, C, D. This is obviously fuse A. So the first thing we're obviously going to need to check is the fuse itself. Then from the fuse comes through the wiring loom, and eventually it goes through a connector and goes to the actual fan motor itself. So that's the positive side of your circuit. Then from the motor there is a wire that is now the negative side of the motor, comes through, out and comes down to a it's basically a bimetallic thermal switch that is fixed into the side of the radiator, and we'll actually have a look at that on the radiator itself in a little while. And the way this switch works is there is literally a bimetallic switch. So one side of the switch is probably brass, the other side is steel. Now obviously brass heats up faster than steel, so this is actually in contact with the water in the radiator here. And as the water in the radiator heats up, the switch will actually bend until eventually it makes a contact at a certain temperature, and that then allows the electricity to earth through the switch and into the aluminium body of the radiator itself. So when the switch is open, the current flows through the radiator itself, and then at the top here, what you've got on the top mount of the radiator, there is another wire that's fitted to the top of the fan, and that then goes to earth. Now the problem is that's in a point where you can get lots of corrosion, so the first thing we need to check for corrosion on this connection and make sure we are getting a good earth. So I've got my multimeter, I've got a whole selection of wires to plug things into to actually get their power where we want it to. So let's move over to the bike, and the first thing I'm going to check, we'll do the fuse. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need to do is remove the seat, which is always much fun and games on the CB-1. And then we're going to need to remove this side panel to gain access to the fuse box. So let's undo the 3 bolts. Now normally the bolts that are used to hold these covers on from Honda have actually got a shoulder on them, but for various reasons I didn't actually have enough good shoulder bolts, so I'm actually using these, which I think I used on the CBR 400, and they're actually joinery bolts. You can get them from Screwfix. So they don't have the collar, but I've used them on all the covers on this bike, and so far I've not had an issue with them. So if you're struggling to get hold of the proper Honda bolts, they're a reasonable alternative. Okay, so here's our little fuse box. Now, it's never the easiest to get to, because this great little chunk of wire sits right where, there we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see, there's your fuse box, and they actually very handily tell you which fuse is which. So from the rear, that should be our fan switch, and A, B, C, D. So let's take this fuse out, grab the multimeter, and we'll check it. Okay, so I've got the multimeter out, got our fuse. I'll set the multimeter onto the ohm setting, and hopefully you can see we're getting no resistance from the fuse, so that's clearly not blown. So straight away I can eliminate the fuse, but just to make sure I am checking the right one, I'm going to take this fuse out and we'll check. Yep, so all my fuses are fine, and in fact while I'm here I'm going to replace the two spare fuses that are missing. So I can eliminate the fuse. I know that we've got power, or we should be getting power to the actual fan motor itself. So I'm going to grab a couple of fuses, move the bike round, and we'll have a look at the other side of the bike. Okay, so we've moved across to the other side of the bike now, and this is the thermo switch I was talking about. Now we're going to need to remove this cover to get at the wiring, which is horribly tucked away. So in order to do that, unfortunately, we do have to remove the bottom bolts for the radiator and just swing the radiator forward a bit and out of the way. So there's one. Right, that's the two bottom bolts out. We can swing that over, and that now gives us room to remove this cover. So let me just get a tub to put all these bolts in, and now we can remove the cover. So obviously it's a bit deceptive on the cover, like the side covers. Only some of the bolts actually do anything, the other ones are just there for decoration. So all you need to remove is this bolt and this bolt. This one's purely for decoration. Now this poor little bike, it was restored about 8 years ago, completely rebuilt it. It's starting to show its age a bit now, unfortunately. Okay, the other thing hopefully you can see is just up here. This is where the earth connector goes. So the next thing we want to test is if we take this wire off here, and I'm just going to grab this bit of wire here which has got two terminals on it. So if we plug this in, and turn the ignition on, hopefully if we touch this bolt we should touch the side of the engine, hopefully the fan should come on. Now okay, so for some reason we're not getting power coming through. Obviously if you can short circuit through here, you know the fan motor's working. and then if we actually short it through here, we know that that's not working. But as you can see, things are totally dead. So there's obviously a problem between the fuse and the motor itself, which is a bit of a pain because the connector is a nightmare to get to. Let's touch right up here. So I'm afraid for the next bit of video, you're going to see pretty much my shoulder and not a lot else, because it's the only way I can get to it. So the connector is right up here, just underneath the thermostat housing, and it is a pig. It is possibly the most inaccessible connector there is on the whole bike. Okay. So, I don't know how well you can actually see this on the video, but just here is a white connector. What I'll do is I'll take a photograph of it and I'll put that up instead. Right, so on the connector itself there is a green wire, which is your earth, and then there is a black wire, which will be your power feed. So I'm just going to connect this wire into the terminal for the black connector, and then I'm going to connect this up to this little bulb, which is then earthed. So now, if I turn the ignition on, you can see we're getting an orange light. So what that means is power is definitely getting as far as this terminal here, this connector, and is going in. So whatever the problem is, it's something to do with the motor. So again, if I just show you that, hopefully you can see that light up when I turn the power on. So we know there's power going where it should go. Whatever the problem is, it's somewhere in the fan itself. So that means I'm going to have to drain the coolant system down, and we'll remove the radiator and we'll have a look at that. So let me go and grab a bucket, and it's time to get wet, because you can never ever drain coolant without getting it everywhere. Okay, well at this point I'm going to have to take the fuel tank off, purely because we're going to have to get at the radiator cap itself, which of course is located under the front of the fuel tank. So let's grab a few tools, make sure that is in the off position. Of course, it would help if I had a 10mm spanner. Right, I've had my cup of tea and the coolant's finished draining off. So now, time to remove the radiator. So the first thing, remove the hose. And what you'll probably find is that when you take the hose off, yet more coolant will leak out. So what I'm going to do is put the drain plug back in, making sure I tighten it up while I think about it. And what's going to happen is, as we take this hose off, is that more coolant is going to find its way out. Now, it's not unusual for the hose itself to sort of stick to the radiator, so what you might have to do is just go around with a screwdriver and just gently break the corrosion. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'll take the radiator off so it's more accessible. So we'll go and do the radiator hose on the top, on the other side. Which of course you can't see. Now to remove the radiator totally. Just undo this bolt at the top. And that frees the radiator off, which gives us better access to wrestle with the hoses. Like I said, you may need to just get a screwdriver and just break the corrosion that would have formed around the hose. Another option is to get a hot air gun a little bit of a twist, that'll come off, and as you can see, a bit more coolant tends to come out. Okay, one radiator removed, so we'll move it over to the bench and then we can start testing the actual fan itself. Okay, so here we are back on the bench. You can see there's the fan motor itself, there's the thermo switch, and just up here this is the connection that goes from the radiator to the earth. So what I'm going to do is, we've got a black wire and a green wire. They're a bit dirty, but you can just about, there we are. So it's a black wire with a blue trace. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this cable here to the black wire and just plug it onto the battery. And then I'm going to take this wire, plug it to there, so we're going to bypass the switch, and when we touch the battery, absolutely nothing is happening, so I can only assume that the fan itself is actually dead. So that means we're going to have to strip the fan down and find out what's wrong with it. Now you can, let me just disconnect this. I need an 8mm spanner. Socket would have actually been easier, but never mind. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo these through screws here and actually take the back cover off the fan itself. Now when you lift this cover off, there are two spring-loaded bushes. So you can see there's one, and the other one appears to be completely jammed in place. There's the contacts. We'll give those, or the armature, we'll give that a clean. Now the problem with these motors is they're not really designed to be dismantled. So really, I'm probably going to have to get myself another motor. I'm just going to try prizing these two little clips off. And see if I can get at this contact. Now this may take a little while, so I'm going to stop recording, and if I do have any joy, I'll bring you back. Right, as I suspected, these little clips are definitely designed not to come off, so I ended up breaking the post. So what I've done is I actually got the Dremel out in a very fine drill, and I drilled and tapped the holder back in place, and then cleaned everything with some brake cleaner. You could use contact cleaner, and now you can see there's nothing actually wrong with the bushes. They both spring in and out as they should. So all I've got to do now, before we can reassemble everything, is put my little box of self-tappers away before I knock it for 6, and then we just need to give the actual armature a good clean. So what you want is a little bit of green Scotch pad, good generous squirt, a brake cleaner or contact cleaner, and just go around and tidy all that up. Unfortunately, what happens is, as in the case of this one, with age the bushes tend to jam in place, or what happens, you get build up of carbon from the bushes around the armature. Right, so that's all clean. We'll just push both of these back. Now it's just a case of lining up the screws. Screwing everything back in place, and we'll test it again. See that solved the problem. Now I'm sure if you just went in with the brake cleaner or contact cleaner and very carefully wiggled the contact or the bush around in place, you could probably avoid snapping off the retaining lugs and having to drill and re-tap them. So let's try again. Connect that to there. And there we go, we have a working fan. But while I'm at it, I'm going to give all the various contacts a damn good clean. It certainly doesn't help, it doesn't hurt to put some dielectric grease on there when you reassemble them. Now the one thing I haven't tested while we've had all this apart is this switch here. Unfortunately there isn't really any way of testing it other than getting the bike up to temperature and waiting to see if the fan cuts in, and really you need to take the bike for a ride to do that. So we'll just have to wait and see and hope that that isn't a problem. Okay. There, should have paid a bit more attention when I dismantled it. Now, in the words of a rather well-known group of workshop manuals, assembly is the reverse of disassembly. So I'm going to head back to the bike. Obviously we'll connect everything back up again and then we'll do a final test before I finish the video. So see you in a minute. Okay, so that's the radiator and everything refitted, and all we need to do now is I'm just going to do a quick check of the fan in situ. So let's wire that up. Turn the ignition on. And now if I touch the engine, that comes on, as you can hear, and again touch the radiator, comes on. So I know all the connections are now good. So now all we need to do is refill it all up with coolant and bleed the system through. The problem is, because where the radiator cap is, you can't actually run it up with the tank in place, so I'm going to need to hook up the remote tank. While I'm at it, I'm just going to check the overflow tank because that seems a bit empty, not surprisingly. That's a good guess. Okay, so we've got some petrol in my little remote fuel tank, which at the moment has got a very, very short hose on it, which is far from ideal, but there we go. Now this little bike has been sat for a couple of months in the garage unused, so let's see if it will start. And as usual, we've got the non-starting problem that you always get with these bikes when you leave them for too long. So I guess I will be cleaning out the carbs again. But of course we've all seen that video before, so I don't think I need to repeat all that. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope I've sort of given you a bit of an idea of how the cooling fan works on these bikes and the sort of things that can go wrong. So thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.